I
The
want you
millionaire hid
gone.
cameras to
Do you
protect his
understand
disabled
me?
twins,
Get
but
out
he
of
was
my
shocked to see
sight
this.
immediately.
He remembered the long nights of studying,
You have to
the
listen to me.
sacrifices his
This
mother made to
decision,
give him a
it
better
affects
chance at
everything
life,
you've worked for.
and the relentless work he
Please,
put
just
in to make it
reconsider
all
what I'm
come
saying.
true. Today,
Hey, now,
Elliot was a
don't you
millionaire,
worry.
a successful
all right,
businessman
you're
with a
okay.
thriving company that
Look at your
provided him with
sister, she
everything
thinks
he had
that's
ever
funny.
wanted. He had a big house, expensive cars, and more than enough money to live comfortably. But all of that success, all of that wealth, felt meaningless when he looked at his two children, Lucas and Lily. Lucas and Lily were twins, and their birth had been a joyous occasion for Elliot and his wife, Megan. They had waited for so long to become parents, and when the twins arrived, they were overjoyed. But the happiness was short-lived. Shortly after their birth, it became apparent that something was wrong. The doctors couldn't pinpoint exactly what the issue was, but both Lucas and Lily had a rare condition that left them unable to walk or talk properly. Their minds were sharp, but their bodies didn't cooperate. They needed constant care, and the road ahead seemed uncertain. Elliot, like any father, wanted to do everything in his power to make their lives better. He spared no expense in making sure they had the best medical care, the best equipment, and the most qualified staff to take care of them. But no matter how much he spent, no matter how many doctors he consulted, there were still moments of doubt. Could he ever truly protect them? Could he ensure that they were receiving the best care possible? It was this doubt that led him to install the hidden cameras. At first, Elliot had tried to push away the feeling of paranoia. He trusted the caregivers who worked with Lucas and Lily. Maria, their primary caregiver, had been with them for over 2 years. She was kind, attentive, and had become a motherly figure to the twins. She knew their routine inside and out and had always been there for them when they needed someone. But Elliot's mind couldn't shake the thought. Was she doing everything she could to help them? Were the other staff members taking proper care of the twins when Elliot wasn't around? And what if there were things happening behind closed doors that he didn't know about? As much as Elliot hated the idea of spying on his own home, the thought of his children being hurt or neglected was worse. He had worked so hard to give them everything they needed, and the last thing he wanted was for them to suffer in silence. So, he made the decision. Hidden cameras were installed in various rooms of the house, carefully concealed in places where they wouldn't be noticed. Elliot told himself that he was only doing this to protect them, to make sure that they were always safe. He told himself it was a small price to pay for peace of mind. At first, the footage was reassuring. He saw Maria playing with the twins, reading them stories, and helping them with their daily exercises. He saw the caregivers gently guiding Lucas and Lily through their routines, talking to them in soft, loving voices. It made Elliot feel relieved. For a while, he was convinced that the cameras were a good idea. They gave him a sense of control, even though he was hundreds of miles away, working on his business. The cameras allowed him to check in on his children whenever he wanted, to see firsthand that they were in good hands. But over time, something started to feel off. It wasn't something Elliot could easily put into words. He noticed that Maria's tone seemed different in some of the videos, not in a bad way, but in a way that made him feel uncomfortable. Sometimes, when she thought no one was watching, she would whisper something to the twins. The words weren't clear enough for Elliot to hear, but the way she spoke seemed different from the way she had spoken when he was around. There was a subtle tension in the air, an unspoken feeling that lingered in the room. Elliot could sense it, but he couldn't quite explain why it bothered him. Elliot tried to convince himself that he was just being paranoid. After all, Maria had been with them for so long. She had never given him a reason to doubt her before. And the other caregivers were equally as dedicated. They had all been trained to care for Lucas and Lily's unique needs, and Elliot had carefully selected each one of them based on their qualifications and experience. Surely, there was no reason to be suspicious. But the more Elliot watched, the more questions began to arise. He saw moments when the twins seemed unusually still, too quiet for too long. The doctors had told him that the twins could still understand and feel, even if they couldn't express it the way other children could. They could hear and process everything around them, but sometimes, Elliot wondered if they were truly being heard by the people who cared for them. One evening, as Elliot sat at his desk, the soft glow of the computer screen illuminating his face, he felt a knot form in his stomach. He had just finished a long day of meetings and had promised himself that he would check on the twins before bed. He opened the camera feed on his laptop, scrolling through the different rooms. He watched as Maria fed the twins their dinner, as she helped them with their exercises, and as she read them a bedtime story. At first, it all seemed normal, but then something caught his eye. Maria was speaking softly to the twins, and this time, Elliot could hear what she was saying. It wasn't the usual comforting words. It wasn't the typical encouragement or soothing tone that Elliot had heard before. Instead, Maria was talking about her own life, about her struggles, her hopes, and her fears. She spoke as though the twins could understand every word, as though they were her confidants, her sounding board. "Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever get out of this town," she murmured to them. "I want something more for myself, but I don't know if I can ever leave you two behind." Elliot's heart sank. He had never heard Maria speak like that before. Was this what the twins had been hearing when no one else was around? Was this what they had to endure during the times when he wasn't there? He shook his head, trying to push the uneasy thoughts away. He reminded himself that Maria had always been good to the twins. She had always been kind and loving. Maybe she was just venting, looking for a little comfort in an overwhelming situation. After all, taking care of two disabled children was no easy task. Elliot couldn't imagine the pressure Maria must have felt. But still, the words lingered in his mind, and he couldn't help but wonder. Was she hiding something from him? Was there more going on behind the scenes than he realized? Elliot couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It was a feeling he couldn't ignore any longer, and the weight of it pressed on him every day. He had built his life to protect his children, but now he was faced with the possibility that his efforts might not be enough. He had created a safe environment, but was it truly safe? Were the people he trusted with his children's lives really giving them the care they deserved? Elliot sat back in his chair, staring at the screen in front of him. The cameras had been installed to bring him peace of mind, but now they only filled him with anxiety. He had to know the truth. He couldn't continue living in uncertainty, and so he made the decision to dig deeper. The cameras had been his way of protecting the twins, but now they might hold the answers to the questions that had been weighing on his heart. The days that followed were filled with a growing unease in Elliot's heart. He couldn't stop thinking about the footage he had seen of Maria speaking to Lucas and Lily in a way that felt out of place. Her words, while soft and kind, were laced with something he couldn't quite understand. It wasn't malicious, but there was an air of tension in her tone that made Elliot's stomach twist. She wasn't just taking care of his children anymore. She was confiding in them, talking to them about things he knew they could never respond to. The thought of her treating his children as if they were her personal diary disturbed him. For a while, Elliot couldn't bring himself to watch any more footage. He told himself that it was nothing, that he was simply overthinking. After all, Maria had been a dedicated caregiver for years. She had always been so loving with the twins, treating them like they were her own children. He didn't want to jump to conclusions based on a few strange moments. But the more he tried to ignore it, the more the doubt gnawed at him. Meanwhile, Maria continued to carry out her duties as usual. She helped Lucas and Lily with their daily routines, feeding them their meals, helping them with their exercises, and making sure they took their medication on time. She would often sing to them, trying to bring some joy into their lives. The twins' faces would light up at the sound of her voice, and they seemed to respond positively to her presence. It was clear to Elliot that Maria cared deeply for the twins, but it was also clear that something wasn't quite right. Elliot decided to observe the situation more closely. He began to check in on the cameras more frequently, watching Maria's interactions with the twins during the day. He saw moments of tenderness, Maria brushing their hair, adjusting their pillows, holding their hands as if she were trying to comfort them. But there were also moments that felt off. Sometimes, when the twins were asleep, he could see Maria standing in the corner of the room, watching them silently, her face full of what appeared to be deep thought or worry. Other times, she would sit at the edge of their beds, looking at them for what felt like an eternity, her eyes distant and lost in thought. Elliot found himself growing more and more restless. He began to notice small things he hadn't paid attention to before. The twins' meals seemed to take longer to prepare than usual. The caregivers were often late in getting them into bed, as if they were distracted by something. At first, Elliot thought it might be just an off day here and there, but the pattern began to repeat. One evening, as Elliot watched the live feed from his office, He saw Maria in the kitchen preparing dinner. Lucas and Lily were in the living room, watching a video on their special screen designed to help them communicate. It was a calming video of nature, with soft music and beautiful images of forests and streams. They often enjoyed these videos as they helped soothe their minds and encouraged them to focus. But this time, something was different. Instead of watching the video, Lucas and Lily seemed restless. They were fidgeting in their chairs, looking around the room, their eyes darting toward the hallway where Maria was. Elliot couldn't hear them, but their body language seemed off. It was almost as if they were waiting for something or someone. Elliot decided to reach out to one of the other caregivers, Nina, who worked part-time in the afternoons. Nina was always cheerful and kind, and she had been working with the Grayson family for about a year. She was particularly close to Lucas, often spending time with him when Maria wasn't around. Elliot had always trusted Nina's judgment and thought she could shed some light on what was going on. When he asked Nina about the twins' behavior during the day, she seemed a little uncomfortable, but she brushed it off as nothing more than a minor issue. "They're just going through a phase," she said with a smile. "Kids are unpredictable, you know. They'll be fine." But Elliot could sense that Nina wasn't being entirely truthful. He pushed a little further, asking her if everything was okay with the routine, if anything had changed recently, but Nina only offered vague responses and quickly changed the subject. Elliot couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't adding up. If it were just a phase, why had he never seen the twins behave like this before? They were always calm, always so peaceful. Something was wrong, and he needed to find out what it was. The next day, Elliot decided to take matters into his own hands. He stayed home from work, telling his assistant that he would be busy with personal matters. He wanted to observe the situation firsthand, without relying on the footage alone. He sat in the living room, trying to stay out of sight of the twins and the staff, while still being able to watch them closely. It didn't take long for Elliot to notice more strange behavior. Maria, as usual, was kind and attentive to the twins, but there was a noticeable distance in her interactions with them. Instead of being fully engaged, she seemed distracted, as though her mind was elsewhere. Occasionally, she would whisper something to herself or glance over her shoulder as if she were worried someone might overhear. It was subtle, but it was enough to make Elliot feel uneasy. Elliot decided to follow Maria after she left the twins' room. He knew this wasn't ideal, but he couldn't help it. He needed answers. He trailed her from a distance, staying out of sight as she moved through the house. He saw her enter the laundry room, and through the slightly cracked door, he heard her talking to someone. It was a low, hurried conversation, but Elliot could make out some of the words. "I'm not sure how much longer I can keep this up," Maria whispered. "If he finds out what we're doing, it'll be over." Elliot's heart raced. What was Maria talking about? What was she hiding from him? He quickly retreated to the living room, trying to calm himself. He didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the situation was becoming more and more suspicious. He had to know what was really going on in his own home. He decided that he would confront Maria the next day. He would ask her directly what was happening. He had to trust her, but he couldn't ignore his growing doubts. That night, as Elliot lay in bed, he couldn't shake the images of what he had witnessed. He kept replaying the moments in his mind, the whispers, the strange behavior, the way the twins seemed restless. Was it all connected? Was it possible that Maria, despite her years of service and dedication, was hiding something? And if she was, what did it mean for the twins? What was she keeping from him? Elliot knew he had to get to the bottom of it, no matter the cost. But the more he thought about it, the more questions arose. Could he trust anyone? Had he let his guard down for too long, or was this simply a misunderstanding? His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, and all he knew for sure was that he couldn't go on living in uncertainty. Something was wrong, and he was determined to uncover the truth. The days following Elliot's decision to confront Maria felt like a blur. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, and each passing day only made his suspicions grow stronger. He had always trusted his instincts, and now those instincts were telling him that he needed to dig deeper, even if it meant facing uncomfortable truths. He knew he had to confront Maria, but he wasn't sure how to go about it. Would she be honest with him? Or would she deny everything and leave him even more confused? The next morning, after a restless night of tossing and turning, Elliot finally decided to speak to Maria. He had rehearsed the conversation in his head countless times, but now that the moment had arrived, he felt a mix of anxiety and determination. He didn't want to accuse her of anything without knowing the full story, but he couldn't ignore the mounting evidence. He had to get answers. Maria was in the kitchen preparing breakfast for the twins when Elliot walked in. She turned around when she heard him approach, offering a warm smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good morning, Mr. Grayson," she said, her voice soft, almost too soft. There was a slight tremor in her voice that Elliot immediately noticed, but he brushed it off, thinking it was just his nerves getting the best of him. "Morning, Maria," Elliot replied, trying to keep his tone casual. He didn't want to sound accusing, but he couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency. He cleared his throat, gathering his thoughts. "I need to talk to you about something. It's important." Maria looked at him with a hint of concern, setting down the spatula she was holding. "Of course, Mr. Grayson, is everything all right?" Elliot hesitated for a moment. He wasn't sure how to begin, but he knew he had to be direct. "I've been watching the footage from the cameras," he said, his voice steady but firm. "And I've noticed some things that don't sit right with me." Maria's face immediately stiffened, her eyes darting away from him for just a second before she regained her composure. "Footage," she repeated, her tone almost too calm. "What footage?" "The cameras I had installed," Elliot said, watching her closely. "I know you've been taking care of the twins, but I've seen some things that concern me. I need you to be honest with me, Maria." Maria's expression faltered for a moment, her eyes lowering to the ground. Elliot could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she seemed to shrink under his gaze. She was clearly uncomfortable, and for a brief moment, Elliot wondered if he had made a mistake. But his gut told him that he was on the right path. The unease in his heart had been growing for too long, and now he needed answers. I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Grayson," Maria said, her voice shaking slightly. "I've been doing my best for Lucas and Lily just like always." "I know you have, Maria," Elliot said, his voice softening. He didn't want to make her feel cornered, but he couldn't let her off the hook so easily. "But there's been some strange behavior I've noticed. The way you've been speaking to them, the way they seem restless. And the way you've been acting when you think no one is watching, it's not like you." Maria took a deep breath, clearly struggling to maintain her composure. She looked up at Elliot, her eyes filled with a mix of guilt and fear. "Mr. Grayson, I never meant to make you feel uncomfortable. It's just, I've been trying to help them. I've been trying to figure out a way to make them respond, to help them communicate." Elliot frowned, confused. "What do you mean, help them communicate?" Maria hesitated, her hands trembling slightly as she wrung them together. She seemed torn, as though she wasn't sure whether she should tell him the truth or keep quiet. After a long pause, she finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been trying to figure out if they can understand more than we think, if there's a way to help them speak, even if it's not the way we expect." Elliot's heart skipped a beat. He had never considered that possibility. He knew that the twins could understand and feel emotions, but he had always been told that their condition was something that couldn't be fixed. The idea that Maria had been trying to help them communicate, on her own without consulting him or the doctors, left him feeling both surprised and unsettled. "So, you've been experimenting?" Elliot asked, his voice a mix of disbelief and concern. Maria nodded slowly, her face flushed with shame. "I know it sounds crazy, but I couldn't help it. I saw how frustrated they were, how hard it was for them to express themselves, and I thought maybe I could try something that could help them. I just wanted to do more for them, Mr. Grayson. I thought if I could find a way to unlock their voices, it would change everything for them." Elliot was silent for a moment, processing her words. He didn't know whether to feel angry, betrayed, or sympathetic. He had hired Maria to care for his children, to provide them with love and safety, not to conduct experiments on them. But at the same time, he understood her desire to help. She wasn't malicious. She was just trying to make a difference in the twins' lives, even if it meant going behind his back. "I appreciate that you care so much, Maria," Elliot said finally, his voice calm but firm. "But you should have come to me first. We have doctors, specialists who know how to help them. You can't just take matters into your own hands like this." Maria's eyes filled with tears as she nodded. "I know, Mr. Grayson, I was wrong. I didn't want to see them suffer anymore. I didn't want them to feel trapped in their own bodies, unable to say what they wanted." Elliot sighed, feeling a mix of frustration and sadness. He understood Maria's intentions, but her actions had crossed a line. She had put the twins in a position where they might have been subjected to something they couldn't understand, all in the name of trying to help. It wasn't fair to them, and it wasn't fair to Elliot. He had trusted her, and now he felt as though that trust had been broken. "I can't have you continuing this, Maria," Elliot said, his voice steady. "I need you to promise me that you won't do anything like this again. We'll find another way to help them, but we need to do it the right way." Maria nodded, her shoulders shaking with emotion. "I promise, Mr. Grayson, I'll never do anything like that again. I'm so sorry. I never meant to cause any harm." Elliot stood up, his heart heavy with the weight of the conversation. He wanted to believe Maria, but he knew that things couldn't go back to the way they were. He had to make sure that the twins were always cared for in a way that was safe and responsible. He couldn't afford to take any more chances. As he walked out of the kitchen, Elliot's mind was spinning. What had he learned? Maria had been trying to help, yes, but her methods were far from ideal. He was grateful that she had been honest with him, but he couldn't help but feel that things were never going to be the same again. He needed to reassess everything: his trust in Maria, his decisions for the twins' care, and the steps he would need to take to ensure that they were always protected. He knew one thing for certain: the road ahead would be difficult, but he was determined to do whatever it took to give Lucas and Lily the life they deserved. The days following the conversation with Maria felt heavy for Elliot. He knew he had made the right choice in confronting her, but the weight of it all still hung over him. He couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had been growing in his gut for weeks. It wasn't just about Maria's secret attempts to help the twins communicate. It was about the bigger picture: the safety of his children, the trust he had placed in others, and the responsibility that came with being their father. Elliot spent the next few days trying to process everything. He knew he had to take action, not just with Maria, but with the entire situation. He had always tried to do what was best for Lucas and Lily, but now, more than ever, he felt the pressure of being their protector. He was their father, their advocate, and it was his job to make sure they were cared for in the best way possible. His first step was to sit down with Megan, his wife. The two of them hadn't talked much about the events that had unfolded. Megan had been busy with her own work, but Elliot knew this was something they needed to face together. After putting the twins to bed one evening, Elliot invited Megan into their study. They sat across from each other, the dim light from the desk lamp casting a soft glow on their faces. "Megan," Elliot began, his voice quiet but firm, "there's something we need to talk about." Megan looked up at him, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "What is it, Elliot?" "I talked to Maria," Elliot said, his words slow and measured. "She's been doing things trying to help the twins communicate, on her own without telling us." Megan's brow furrowed, a mix of confusion and concern crossing her face. "What do you mean?" "What exactly has she been doing?" Elliot took a deep breath. "She's been experimenting, trying to get them to respond in ways we didn't know they could. I'm not sure what she was thinking, but it's not something we ever discussed with her. She kept it all hidden from us." Megan sat back in her chair, processing the information. "I can't believe she would do that. I thought we trusted her." "We did," Elliot replied, running a hand through his hair. "But I think she got caught up in wanting to help them. She thought she was doing something good, but it was reckless, and it could have put them in danger." Megan's eyes filled with concern as she reached for his hand. "So, what are we going to do?" Elliot's gaze shifted to the window, his mind racing. "We have to make sure this doesn't happen again. We have to be more involved, Megan. We can't just leave things in the hands of other people, not when it comes to our children." Megan nodded, her voice steady. "I agree. We need to have more control over their care. But we also need to figure out a way to make sure Maria understands that we can't just have her acting on her own. She needs boundaries." Elliot looked at his wife, the weight of the situation slowly starting to lift from his shoulders. Together, they would make sure the twins were always safe and that they had the best possible care moving forward. It wasn't going to be easy, but they were in this together. They were a team. The following day, Elliot decided to take a more proactive approach. He knew that Maria needed to understand the severity of her actions. He also knew that he couldn't just dismiss her years of dedication. Despite her mistake, Maria had always cared deeply for the twins. She had been their lifeline when Elliot and Megan couldn't be there, and that wasn't something he could ignore. But the trust had been broken, and it needed to be rebuilt. Elliot called a meeting with Maria in the afternoon. This time, it wasn't just a conversation. It was a discussion about boundaries, trust, and moving forward. He needed to make it clear that the twins' safety was non-negotiable and that they could never again be placed in a position where their well-being was compromised. When Maria walked into the room, her face was pale, and she seemed more nervous than ever. She knew what this meeting was about, and Elliot could see the guilt written all over her face. But he also knew that it wasn't just about punishing her. It was about understanding what had gone wrong and ensuring that it didn't happen again. "Maria," Elliot began, his voice steady but firm, "I want to start by saying that I appreciate the care you've given to Lucas and Lily over the years. You've been an important part of their lives, and I can't ignore that, but what you did, experimenting on them without telling us, it's unacceptable." Maria's eyes filled with tears as she nodded, her voice shaky. "I know, Mr. Grayson. I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt them. I thought I could help them. I thought if I could find a way to get them to communicate, they wouldn't feel so trapped. I didn't want them to suffer any more." Elliot sighed, his heart heavy. "I understand that you want to help, but you crossed a line. The twins depend on us, and we can't take risks like that. You should have come to us, Maria. We could have worked together, but instead you made decisions on your own without considering the consequences." "I never wanted to hurt them," Maria whispered. "I only wanted to help. But I see now that I made a terrible mistake." Elliot paused for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I know you didn't mean harm, but I can't let this go. We need to set boundaries, Maria. No more secret decisions. No more going behind our backs. You have to understand that trust is something we can't afford to lose, not with our children's lives." Maria nodded, her hands clasped tightly together. "I understand, Mr. Grayson. I'll do whatever it takes to regain your trust." Elliot looked at her, his face softening just slightly. "I want to believe you, Maria, but it's going to take time. You'll have to prove that you can follow the rules, that you can work with us, not on your own. We need to be in this together, all of us." Maria wiped her eyes, her voice barely above a whisper. "I promise. I'll prove that I can do better. I'll follow whatever rules you set. I just want to make things right." Elliot nodded, his mind still processing everything. He knew it wasn't going to be easy, but he also knew that Maria had the potential to be part of their team again. It would take time, and it would take trust, but if she was willing to work with them, they could rebuild what had been broken. As the weeks passed, Elliot, Megan, and Maria began to settle into a new routine. There was still tension in the air, but it was slowly starting to ease. Maria followed the new boundaries set by Elliot and Megan, and while it wasn't perfect, it was progress. The twins, too, seemed to adjust to the new structure, and Elliot couldn't help but feel a sense of relief as he watched them thrive once again. But there was still a lingering question in Elliot's mind. Was he doing enough? He had taken the first step by confronting Maria, but he knew there was more work to be done. He needed to ensure that Lucas and Lily had the best care, the best opportunities, and the best chance at living a fulfilling life. No more secrets, no more guessing. It was time to put the twins' needs first, and that meant being more involved than ever before. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Elliot was willing to do whatever it took to protect his children. He had learned that trust could be fragile, but it could also be rebuilt. And with the support of his family, he knew they would find a way to give Lucas and Lily the life they deserved.